the life of people in the inside. And they have done it in 1882, they have done it in 1948, and they have done it yesterday in the Nakab or in the West Bank, and they're going to do it next week if we will continue to talk about peace negotiations, two-state solutions, all kinds of irrelevant concepts that have nothing to do with the realities on the ground. The second concept from the past, which I think we should insist on conveying to people, whether we try to protest against something that Israel is doing today, or whether we will commemorate in January what Israel had done in the Gaza Strip, or when we commemorate in May the crime that Israel committed in 1948. And this is the ethnic cleansing. It is a concept that was developed, of course, in the 1990s more clearly because of what happened in the Balkan Wars. But even before that, this was regarded by the international community as an unacceptable ideology and policy. Only genocide is regarded by the international community as worse than ethnic cleansing. And quite often the two are interconnected, as we can see in other places and as we can see in Israel and Palestine. When you are allowed to pursue a policy of ethnic cleansing, don't be surprised if these perpetrators would one day move to genocide. Because in both cases, you have to totally dehumanize the people you are expelling or massacring. Even if they are children, they have to be totally dehumanized. And anybody who lived in Israel long enough, as I did, knows that the main corruption of people through the military service is the total dehumanization of the Palestinians. That's why a soldier, when he sees a Palestinian baby, he doesn't see a baby. He sees a potential enemy. And the road from kicking out the baby from the house or killing the baby is not very long. And I think that the message of ethnic cleansing is the message of criminalizing not the policies of the state of Israel, but criminalizing the state of Israel. And we should do this. We should do this because only a fascist approach to life would say that in every historical condition, a state and a country is the same thing. No, it is not. Sometimes the state is the worst thing that can happen to a country. And the worst thing that happened to Palestine is the state of Israel. And if we want to make the country of Palestine a place where people could live as equals, in fact live in many ways better than in other parts of the Middle East, maybe even better in some parts of Europe, is to bring the country back at the expense of the state. And I know this is not easy, and this is not about questioning the right of a state to exist. We are individuals, we are activists, we don't have the power to challenge the right of states to exist. We cannot eliminate states. Israel has the power to eliminate states. We don't have the power to eliminate states. What we have is a moral power to say to people that the kind of state that you have founded and the kind of state that you are maintaining is destructive to the country in which you exist. It has led in 1948, the creation of that state, led to the expulsion of half of the native population of Palestine. Show me any other situation in history where the international community, under the slogan of peace, would come and say, in order to make this country a peaceful place, I have to kick out half of the people who live there. Only in Israel and Palestine we have this bizarre historical moment where the United Nations embodying the international community's will, is telling the world that it allows Israel to kick out half of Palestine's population in the name of peace. And once you start like this, the history of Israel, it's very difficult to retract and to explain that actually you have to study history and go back to 1947 and 1948 and say that partition, or the idea of partition, is an immoral idea. It's not even a good realpolitik idea. But that, of course, you couldn't know in 1947. I can understand that in 1947-48, you would have said, let's see, if we divide the country into two, it may work. Who would have known? But 60 years later, can you argue that dividing this baby, if you want, is different from the Solomon trial? It's not surprising. You all know about the Solomon trial, right? You know about the baby and the two mothers, and that the real mother doesn't want the baby to be cut into two. We know who is the real mother in the case of Israel. We know who was willing all the time, supposedly, to petition it. So, I think that the whole idea of the ethnic cleansing is connected to the international support for it, not direct support for it. But the agreement and the consent of the United Nations, and later on the European community, and later on the United States, to say that this is the way peace can only be possible in Palestine. That the Israelis kicked out enough Palestinians and took over enough of Palestine to create the only democracy in the Middle East. They corrupted every commonsensical language that we had in the West in the late 1940s and the early 1950s with the Zionist project. That's how you create democracies? By kicking out the indigenous population so that you can have a Jewish majority? But that's what all young Israelis believe. They learn in the political science department that in order to build a democratic society where the majority can decide what to do, you are entitled first to define the majority, even by means of killing the other side, so that you will be sure what would be the result of the democratic elections. Israelis don't find it at all bizarre that if you create a democracy, you can also perpetrate ethnic cleansing and genocide, so that you get the right electorate for the future democracy. But a lot of people in the West will talk about Israel as a democratic state, because they would say the majority votes and decides what to do. The fact that the majority has to be kept all the time by ethnically cleansing people, by massacring them, by colonizing them, by putting them in great ghettos like in Gaza, is never discussed as part of the Israeli democracy. And I think we should bring that to the fore. The only way to keep Israel as a democratic state, according to the Zionist ideology, is to continue to be a criminal state. It is almost like allowing people in the worst kind of prison, the worst kind of criminals, to have a democratic system by the force of the gun, by the force of the brutality, by the force of their sheer power. Now, the third and last concept I would like to talk about is, which comes out of colonialism and ethnic cleansing, which are the main driving ideologies behind the Jewish state. Ethnic cleansing and colonialism are the reason that we have a Jewish state in Israel. This is not what we are told, of course, either as Israelis who were born there, and we are not told as people who support Israel around the world. We are told about two very different ideologies. We are told about the need to find the Jews a safe place, and we know it's not a very safe place for Jews. It's the only unsafe place for Jews is to be in Israel. It's the place where most of the Jews have been dying in great numbers since 1948, and that this is the place where Jews can recreate themselves as a national movement, where they can exercise the right for self-determination. But we know that Israel is not interested in the right of self-determination for the Jews. This is why it brings hundreds and thousands of non-Jews from all over the world to settle in Israel, because what is important for Israel is not self-determination for the Jewish people. What is important for Israel is to make sure that it's not an Arab state. And if you are a Baha'i and you live on a mountain in the Himalaya, but you are definitely not an Arab, you will become an Israeli Jewish citizen in no time, if you are willing to come over. There's no problem. The rabbis would make sure that you are a Jew, and they may cause you to go through some painful operations, but if you are a man, but all in all, you are welcome because you are not an Arab. And if you're an Arab Jew, you will have to de-Arabize yourself, otherwise you will not be welcome in the Israeli Jewish society. Now the third and last concept, and then I reach to my 30 minutes, is the ethnic purity. The ethnic purity of the state. And this is related to the right of return. Most of the people, especially some of our best friends, and I mean it not ironically, as I just published a book with Noam Chomsky, I include him in this. Some of our best friends are against the right of return, and their practical explanation. They would say it's unrealistic to tell the refugees that they should look forward for the possibility of returning, that they should be encouraged to think about a different kind of future. And I would say that the departure point for this analysis is not practicality, is not realpolitik, because if the basis for analyzing, as Uri Avneri does, and Noam Chomsky does, and all our, and I'm, as I say, I'm not cynically saying our good friends. They are my good friends, but I totally disagree with them on this. If the basis for analyzing the situation is realpolitik, then it means that the balance of power determines your attitude. Well, the balance of power, as we heard yesterday, between the largest and strongest army in the Middle East and the weakest military power in the world, right? If this balance of power determines our attitudes, we shouldn't even meet here today. We should give in to the Israeli dictates. And we know the Israelis are very clear what they want. They want to have as much of Palestine as possible, with as few Palestinians as possible. They wanted it in 1882, and they want it in 2010. This hasn't changed. The means have changed, the historical circumstances have changed, but the vision of what would be a thriving, successful Israeli society is a society which has as few Arabs as possible and as much of Palestine as possible. That hasn't changed. So if realpolitik determines our attitudes, we should give in to this vision. So in any case, we are not dealing with realpolitik when we are challenging what Israel wants. And the reason the Israelis refuse even to acknowledge the right of return, let alone practically implement the right of return, is not because, as some people would think, because they have a very serious conscientious problem of admitting that they have kicked out and massacred people 3 years after the Holocaust. I once thought that this was the main problem. I admit, I once wrote about it. I was hopeful, because I'm optimistic. I'm not very tall. I always see the bottom half of the glass. So I thought the Israelis don't want to talk about the right of return because people who were, like Uri Avneri, for instance, were involved in the ethnic cleansing itself, feel unhappy about it. And if you talk about the right of return, this is the kind of panacea, the remedy for the illness. No, I don't think this has had anything to do with it, unfortunately. it makes a lot of sense from a Zionist point of view to say Arabs are not welcome. Whether these are Arabs we kicked out, whether these are Arabs who we never touched, whether these are Arab Jews who want to insist to remain Arabs, even if they are Jews, they are not welcome. Because we won't be a democracy if these people would come in. That's the major thing. That's on conveying to people. Whether we try to protest against something that Israel is doing today, or whether we will commemorate in January what Israel had done in the Gaza Strip, or when we commemorate in May the crime that Israel committed in 1948. And this is the ethnic cleansing. It is a concept that was developed, of course, in the 1990s more clearly because of what happened in the Balkan Wars. But even before that, in baby, he doesn't see a baby. He sees a potential enemy. And the road from kicking out the baby from the house or killing the baby is not very long. And I think that the message of ethnic cleansing is the message of criminalizing not the policies of the State of Israel, but criminalizing the state of Israel. And we should do this. We should do this because would one day move to genocide. Because in both cases you have to totally dehumanize the people you are expelling or massacring. Even if they are children, they have to be totally dehumanized. And anybody who lived in Israel long enough, as I did, knows that the main corruption of people through the military service is the total dehumanization of the Palestinians. That's why a soldier, when he sees a Palestinian, the life of people in the inside. And they have done it in 1882, they have done it in 1948, and they have done it yesterday in the Nakab or in the West Bank, and are going to do it next week if we will continue to talk about peace negotiations, two-state solutions, all kinds of irrelevant concepts that have nothing to do with the realities on the ground. The second concept from the past, which I think we should insist, this was regarded by the international community as an unacceptable ideology and policy. Only genocide is regarded by the international community as worse than ethnic cleansing. And quite often the two are interconnected, as we can see in other places and as we can see in Israel and Palestine. When you are allowed to pursue a policy of ethnic cleansing, don't be surprised if these perpetrators